And that's why I believe in you, because that is the greatest purpose. It's to love. Honest. It sounds corny, whatever you want to say. I don't care. I love people because there is freedom and power in loving people.
Hello, all you positive heads out there. Thanks for tuning your beautiful brainwaves into another episode of the Positive Head Podcast, where we are firmly convinced that creating success and happiness is rooted in understanding the ultimate nature of reality, and the fact that as human beings, we are all immensely powerful fractals of the one and only source consciousness, which creates and animates all things. Now, of course, understanding this powerful truth is one thing. Applying this incredibly empowering wisdom to everyday life, well, that's another, which is exactly why we provide you with a fresh serving of soul food for thought 5 days a week to help constantly remind you of what matters most. You are it. And I'm your host, Brandon Beecham. I'm the one who will be here with you each and every Wednesday, interviewing a different consciousness changemaker that is also out there working tirelessly to help catalyze change and expand awareness all across Spaceship Earth. On the other 4 weekdays, you can hear me discussing topics such as my favorite thought-provoking quotes, reading and discussing wisdom from empowering books, playing clips from various inspirational spiritual teachers, sharing a bit of mysterious news, taking questions from the audience, and essentially digging into any other mind-expansive topics that will help keep your soul fed by tuning you into positive vibrations on a consistent basis. And you guys have heard me say that if I ever run ads on the show, it will only be with a company that I fully support because I believe their intention is to make a positive difference in the world. Well, I'm pleased to announce that day has arrived and that this episode of the Positive Head Podcast is being brought to you thanks to the support of Gaia. If you're not familiar, Gaia is the go-to source for streaming consciousness content online. And you can sign up for your first month for only 99 cents at gaia.com/positivehead. That's spelled GAIA.com/positivehead. Check it out. All right, all you positive heads, on this week's interview episode, I'm happy to have the indie spiritualist, Chris Grosso, here with me on the show. Chris is a public speaker. He's a writer, podcast host, and spiritual director that is known for his no BS approach to exploring spirituality. I like that, Chris. No BS. That's good. Welcome to the show, my friend.
Hey, Brandon. Thanks for having me on. It's nice to be here with you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm going to ask you the same question. I always start with the same question and end with the same question. So you're in an elevator. Guy next to you looks over, says, "What's your passion?" You've got 10 floors to answer. What do you say?
That's a good question to start with. Service work. That's my passion. Particularly working with healing modalities, those who've struggled with various addictions, whether drugs or alcohol, depression, self-harm, really anything that kind of falls under the mental health umbrella. There's a lot of things that come along with that. But, you know, that's been kind of my story in my life. And so that resonates with me. So just showing up and helping others in whatever way that I can, that's definitely my great passion in life.
Well, that is definitely a good passion and certainly much needed. There's plenty of people that are struggling out there, and plenty of people that are, trying to sort of find their way through that trial. That's a very common theme in our society, right?
It is, yeah.
Well, tell me a little bit about your story. I mean, how did you end up on this particular path? I'm assuming, well, I know from the research that I've done that you have a bit of a similar past yourself.
Right. Yeah. So like I was saying, I mean, that's stuff that I had gone through. I started experimenting with drugs and alcohol actually a little later than most of the kids I was going to high school with, because in 9th and 10th grade, I was involved in what's called straight edge music. And it's kind of a subculture of punk rock and hardcore music. So, you know, I was friends with...
And that's like no drugs, right?
Oh yeah, no drugs, no alcohol, no cigarettes. Some people go really extreme and no sex. I wasn't going that route, but the drugs, alcohol, and cigarettes, no, none of that. So I had friends in high school, the alternative kids and the skateboarders, but on weekends while they were kind of sticking around our rural town and getting high, I had made some friends from another school, and we'd be going out to all these different clubs and venues around New England. So it was really cool. And I fell in love with that music and what it was all about right away. But I'd say maybe about like 2 years after that, so around 10th grade, I don't know, I kind of got bored of the straight edge thing. I still loved punk rock and hardcore music. And it's not that all punk rock and hardcore is straight edge. It's just, it's a subgenre of that. But so I started experimenting like many other kids do with alcohol and pot. And it was fine at first. I mean, I loved it. I connected with it. I felt good. And then, so that was like 11th and 12th grade. And then the hallucinogenics came in and really liked those a lot. And I'm playing in bands at this point, touring around and starting to be exposed to other drugs and always happy to take whatever was around. And that kind of went on from about 19 to 24. And it was pretty much a downward spiral during those years. I was playing in bands, touring, also working. I had a pretty flexible job, but it was really at the age of 24 where I just bottomed out, or at least my first bottom, and ended up going into a detox unit. And that was actually a good experience, to be honest with you, because it was the first time in several years I went more than like a day tops without putting some kind of chemical into my body. So, they did have me on what are called benzodiazepines. Those are basically to help with the withdrawals, help you get through that. But aside from that, once like 3 days went by and I was off those, my system was free of drugs and alcohol, and it felt good. It felt good to feel kind of alive, have yourself and human,
completely back.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So, yeah, man. And so from that detox, which was I think like 7, 8, 9 days, something like that, I went up into their rehab program, and I did a month there and learned a bit about addiction and that I wasn't terminally unique in what I was experiencing, and I wasn't completely insane. Something I kind of feared about myself. And then so the next year I was sober. I was doing some 12-step meetings and started learning a bit about spirituality. But then it was a little over a year, almost to the day, where I went to Rome to visit a friend. And 2 days, was it 2 days before or after my birthday? I don't remember exactly, but I ended up drinking, and that was my first relapse. And unfortunately, that became pretty much a vicious cycle for the next several years of my life, just relapsing, bottoming out, ending back up in a detox, a rehab, or, it got worse, like emergency rooms, jail cells, a couple of psych hospitals after some suicide attempts. And yeah, man, so I've been through the ringer. I think it's fair to say that. But I don't know, about like 5-6 years ago, I went through my last treatment program, and things really started to change for me after that. I became willing to go inside and really start looking at a lot of this raw and vulnerable material that I was not willing to work with prior to that, to start sifting through the wreckage of my past and learning to actually sit with and lean into the pain when it comes, to the best of my ability on any given day. And I should know, I skipped this, but during all of those years of relapse and recovery, I would have long stretches of sobriety that were usually at least a year, sometimes more than that. And I was learning about meditation and visiting various spiritual centers, like whether it's Buddhist or Hindu or whatever. I was just taking it all in, reading the great wisdom books, and so the seeds were being planted, but I wasn't quite ready to go deep into the work. So kind of in a nutshell, that's a bit about what led me onto the path and how I got to where I am today. Interesting.
Yeah. So was there a particular substance that was sort of your most trying, were you one of these guys who was like give me anything and everything doesn't matter? Or was there a particular substance that was really causing you the most problem?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely alcohol was the big one for me. Like I said earlier, I was always happy to take whatever else was around and mix it with alcohol. I didn't care. Actually, I was getting tattooed yesterday, and my friend and I were talking about. He was saying, he's done his share of things, but he's the complete opposite of me. And this is how like an addict between a non-addict. Like he would, for example, he had tried cocaine, and he was doing it, and then he was drinking, and he was saying how, like I didn't like it. Like I didn't like that feeling. Yes, it allowed me to drink more, but I didn't like that. And I'm like, are you nuts? That's why I loved cocaine, because then I could keep drinking all night, and then I could take more drugs. And so anyways, but yeah, so it was really alcohol. Whatever else was around, awesome. Whatever could take me out of my own skin, essentially, was fine by me.
Right. Yeah, and I think you make an interesting point. I'm someone who has always identified with not having an addictive personality. So I've certainly tried, the gamut of substances and so forth. And it's one of those things where it just hasn't ever, like, I've got to have this, even cigarettes. I can think going back to being, like 19 or something and trying smoking cigarettes for like a week or 2 week period with my friends and thinking, okay, I don't really need to do this again. I don't get it. Yeah. And everyone else is like so hooked. So I don't think people sometimes understand how, with different, different people, it's different things. And some people, if they're exposed to something, it's like they just can't stop. They can't get enough of it.
Oh, absolutely. It's crazy. And I'm laughing as you're talking about the cigarettes because I'm lucky. That's one thing I never did start. I've had
surprising, actually.
Right. Most people I know that went down the road I did definitely smoked, but I was so hardcore into it that I could not waste my money on cigarettes. It needed to go to drugs and alcohol, because cigarettes weren't going to get me messed up. I needed the drugs and alcohol.
Yeah.
So I guess I had that going for me, but yeah, still to this day, if I'm out, eating at a restaurant and I see someone leave like a little bit of wine or a little bit of beer in their glass, my mind still works like, how are you doing that? Like you should drink that. Don't leave that there. That's the mindset of someone who's addicted. So, and that's something I know I'll live with for the rest of my life. And, it is what it is, but it is always interesting, because I have friends that just like you, don't have that, at all. They can have a beer and that's it, and they're happy. Not the case for me. I can't. Yeah. I've tried and it's never worked out for me. So I finally had to kind of accept that, and life's really good without it though. So luckily it's not some mundane existence, because then life wouldn't be worth it. But it can be beautiful with or without.
Right. And, I'm curious. I've heard it said, and I don't know whether or not you would agree with this statement or if it's really true, but I found the statement interesting. I heard it said recently that an addict is someone who, will have some beer, alcohol, whatever type of alcohol, and it changes their personality. I could take myself, for example. I could drink every day and not be an alcoholic. Because it's essentially it's not changing who and what I am, and I can just put it down at any given time. Whereas, so I'm drinking every day. I'm not an alcoholic. You have one drink and you're technically an alcoholic. I mean, have you ever heard this sort of perspective on it?
I haven't heard that perspective, but what that brings to mind for me is the way the brain chemistry works for an addict versus a non-addict. And what happens with addicts, once you cross that line, you resort into, we have a triune brain. We have 3 brains. And for an addict, what happens is they resort back when they're in the grips of addiction to the oldest of the brains. It's called the reptilian brain. And that's the fight or flight. That's the old school. That's our first brain. When like the lion was hunting us, it was fight or flight. Right. And so the interesting thing about that though, is for an addict, so they're stuck, and that's the part of their brain that's functioning at the most capacity, not the rational brain that knows, wow, this is going to kill me. It's that old brain, the reptilian brain, that is the most powerful one. And to the point where we as addicts will continue to use until we die. Even though it's that survival part of our brain that's going, we equate survival with the substance we're putting into our body. And that's why, they say with addiction, it's cunning, baffling, and insidious. And it really is. It's absolutely crazy the way it works, and it's very unfortunate. And it's unfortunate too that there's still such a stigma around it. I mean, I do see that people or society, is starting to be a bit more accepting and understanding of what addicts go through, but there is still also no shortage of people that just don't understand it, think it's a moral deficiency, think that people are weak, and that is not the case. I mean, I can't tell you how many times in my own life I've had a bottle of alcohol in my hand, or I was looking at a line on the table that I was about to snort, and I would cry. I'd be there by myself, and I would cry because I did not want to do it, but it was so beyond there was no way I could not do it because when you're in the grips, you're in the grips. There's no way out of it. So that's what comes up, at least when you mention that. But the brain chemistry definitely changes when you put the substance in your body. So I think it sounds like there's some truth to what you're saying. Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. So another thing that I've heard recently that kind of resonated was, you hear alcohol, and of course, alcohol is the most commonly available drug. It's socially acceptable. In my opinion, one of the most dangerous drugs. And you hear, and of course, I have my own ideas, and you've probably heard similar ones. The reason it's so prevalent and allowed and accepted is because it does sort of numb you and dumb us down in a sense. And I think there's certain control mechanisms that like us that way. And so therefore it's put out there. And, but I heard someone, that's a whole nother rabbit hole, but I heard someone recently refer to, hey, it's called spirits for a reason. Like, you're actually opening yourself up, and this gets into a whole nother path too here. But, I thought of that, and I can think of someone in my own life who started drinking and drinking heavily, not heavenly, and it really was the kind of the turning point in her life where she started really having a lot of delusions and sort of, I would say the cheese slipped completely off the cracker at this point, to make a light of a not so funny situation. But she really lost her grip on reality, and all these conspiracies and everything's happening to her, and people were out to get her, and it came with alcohol. And I was talking to someone about it, and they're like, well, they call it spirits for a reason. Maybe there's something that is actually, she's opened herself up. And I find that a really interesting perspective, because of course with psychedelics you hear about this sort of thing. I know personally, having done ayahuasca journeys and things like that, where I've seen multiple times people sort of get into a state where something is channeling through them that is just fascinating. So you think about that on sort of the high end of this, the positive end of the spectrum typically, right? Well, what about on the lower end of the spectrum with, alcohol, spirits?
Yeah, and of course I've heard that as well. And you see a lot of package stores, have the word spirit in the name. But I think it's fair to say that any substance could bring on like a psychosis similar to the one that you're, mentioning about your friend. You're sitting out there on a meth binge or crack, doing crack for several days, and that's going to happen. So each person, these chemicals affect them differently. But I'm glad you brought up ayahuasca, because this is something I often will talk about, and it's not popular with a lot of people in the recovery community. But I think ayahuasca and I think psychedelics, when done in a sacred context and done under the guidance, of say a shaman, if we're talking about ayahuasca, I think that can be a very beautiful and liberating thing, a very healing thing, a very spiritual experience. I agree. A lot of people, there's a lot of dogma around that for people in recovery, because it's just, to them it's drugs, and they just lump everything together. I think that is irresponsible to do that. The way that psychedelics and ayahuasca affect our brain is not the same way that alcohol or heroin or cocaine affects the brain. Those trigger the pleasure centers, whereas these psychedelics are not triggering the pleasure center. So there's a big difference there. And, I haven't done, I've actually never done ayahuasca. I haven't done psychedelics in over 10 years. So I'm not saying that because I'm out here doing it, but I am saying that because there's a wonderful addiction expert. His name is Dr. Gabor Mate. And he's a big proponent for ayahuasca and talks about the very therapeutic effects it can have for people in recovery. And there have been studies on other substances as well
Ibogaine
that help. Exactly, right. That help.
I interviewed I interviewed Martin Polanco and Dan Engel, Deanne Adamson from Crossroads down in Mexico, and what they report with ibogaine in heroin addicts is incredible. He's like, this is the closest thing to a miracle drug that exists. The miraculous potential. Literally, it changes a heroin addict's brain chemistry in one session, is what they're seeing, and so. It's fascinating. That's
great. Yeah, and I wonder because there was a documentary I'd watched on YouTube from a few years ago that David Suzuki did about Gabor, and I don't remember the names, but he was talking to a couple of people about ibogaine down in Mexico, and I'm wondering if it was these two gentlemen you're speaking of. But
probably.
But yeah, it was incredible. They were showing some of the people, the results. Just amazing. And that's not to say, because there are people that will do it and will end up going back to drugs. But, the success rate, at least so far, that has been studied is pretty incredible with these things. So I do think it's very important to make that distinction, between drugs, like in the negative, bad sense, and then, things that people call drugs that really more are plant medicines and
entheogens,
of that nature. Yes, exactly.
All right. Well, now seems like a good moment to take a quick minute to tell those of you who aren't familiar a bit about our sponsor, Gaia. I've been a big fan of Gaia for many years now, which is why they're the only content provider I've ever reached out to in regards to potentially supporting this podcast. So needless to say, I'm very excited they're now supporting the show. Gaia truly is my personal go-to source for streaming consciousness content on the web. They have an incredible 7,000 plus exclusive videos covering 5,000 years of wisdom. Just to give you an example, on the show Missing Links, the incredible researcher Greg Braden explores all the biggest questions concerning who we are, where we come from, where we're going, by connecting the missing links between science and spirituality to complete our understanding of humanity's history and to better understand the interconnectedness of all things. Awesome, right? And that's just one example. As you guys constantly hear me say, it's a daily conscious effort to maintain an elevated vibration. And if you're looking to go deep down the rabbit hole to do so, then Gaia is the best place I know of to do it, period. And you can sign up for your first month for only 99 cents at gaia.com/positivehead. That's spelled GAIA.com/positivehead. Check it out. So what kind of advice, and I'm sure there's someone out there listening, I get emails all the time from people, hey, I've been struggling with addiction or just getting over it. And, as someone who is, has really, quote unquote, made it. And at this point, you are a successful individual. You're writing books. You're doing all these wonderful things, and you've come through it out the other side. And it's amazing. What kind of advice would you give someone that's still in the depths struggling with an addiction?
Yeah, the first thing I would say, and it's virtually impossible, so it's almost pointless for me to say, but I guess I would tailor this to the person who's just starting to come out of it, is please try to learn to be a little more gentle and compassionate with yourself. And I'm kind of talking to myself when I say that, thinking about what I was going through when I first started to come through it. But for anyone who is still kind of caught in the grips, it's really hard. Man, I had a lot of love from my family when I went through it, and they wanted me to get help, and because they cared about me and they were terrified I was going to die. And for all intents and purposes, I should have died a number of times over, the way I was living, but I didn't. But no matter how much love and care or anger or frustration they expressed, didn't make a difference to me, because when you are caught in the cycle, it's a very selfish thing. And I speak from experience. You are, all you're concerned about is getting high for that day. And when you get to the rock bottoms, it doesn't matter what it takes for you to get high. When those withdrawals start to set in, whatever the substance is, man, you need to get high to stop those.
Right.
So it's really hard. But if anyone is listening that's in the throes of it, if you're in that kind of place, the best recommendation I would give them or their family members is treatment. First of all, you need to safely detox off of things like that. Alcohol detoxes can kill you. Benzodiazepine detoxes can kill you. Heroin won't, but you'll feel like you're dying. Heroin can't kill you, but things like seizures come on. So it's very important to be medically detoxed. And then from there, to give yourself the gift of a little bit of time in treatment, 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, 6 months, a year, whatever, there's all different lengths for different situations, but, to kind of, just retreat a little bit from your life and go in and give yourself that break and start doing some work and learning some tools and practices, coping mechanisms, learn how to live life again on life's terms. That's what really needs to be done, and it's not easy. I mean, but it's doable. That's the thing. I'm no one special. I've seen countless other people just like me that have done it, and they inspire me so much. But then I've also seen countless people die tragically that didn't need to die, because of this stuff. So, and the last thing I'll say to that is to the family members, to please try and understand that no matter how much you love them, there's virtually nothing you can do for them in that situation. The best advice I was given was, again, by Gabor Mate, and I was talking to him several months back for a new book I'm working on, and we're talking about relapse and what families can do. And he said, really, he believes that there's only two ways you can go about it, and it needs to be unconditional love. One way or another, you need to really love them for who they are. But there's two ways you're going to approach that unconditional love. Either you're going to love them unconditionally and not try to change them, because no matter what you do, you can't change them. There's nothing you can do. So when you're trying to change them, you're just creating more anger, frustration, resentment, guilt in them, and that just leads to more using. So either one, you're going to love them and allow them to do what they need to do until they're ready to work it out themselves, or two, you're still going to have that unconditional love for them, but have to take them out of your life while they're using. And there's no right or wrong there. They're both completely acceptable. It's just what can you do? And I really appreciated the way he said that. I'd never really looked at it that way, because if you're loving them, but you're wanting them to stop, or you're not wanting, because of course you want them to stop, but trying to make them stop, that's not real unconditional love. And that's just reinforcing, in that addict that I'm not good enough, I'm not enough, and it's just, again, one more reason to go use. So you're either going to love them and allow them to do what they're going to do and be who they are and love them unconditionally for that, or you're still going to love them unconditionally, just not have them in your life while they're using. So, I really appreciated that when he shared that with me.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about your books. You're quite the busy guy. You've written a couple books and you got one on the way. I'd love to. I haven't had the chance to read your books. I would certainly love to. And one of the things I always jokingly say about this podcast is when I bring on authors, it's like my life at this time is so busy. I read a lot less than I used to, and this is like my hack to get like the download on the books that I really want to read. So I'd love for you to give us a little insight into your books.
Yeah, sure. I mean, so my first book is called Spiritualist, and that was published in 2014 by Simon & Schuster and Beyond Words. And that book was part kind of autobiographical, sharing a bit of what I've talked about now and going a bit more in depth as well about my experiences, but also talking about how I came out the other side of it. It explores so there's a lot, obviously, about addiction and recovery, but it's not just an addiction and recovery book. It explores a lot of spirituality, and I bring in different practices and things that have helped me in my life, with healing and again, working with that raw material inside. So it does explore a lot of the wisdom traditions from Buddhism to Vedanta, Hinduism to Taoism and Gnostic Christianity, but also leaves space for the atheists and agnostics, because I have a lot of respect for those people as well. I have dear friends that are atheist and agnostic, and that's a big thing that I try to make clear in both of my books or any workshops I do, is that as long as you're honoring your truth, that's what matters most. It doesn't matter what you do or don't believe spiritually. Like, I'm just as happy to talk about hip hop and hardcore music as I am about, Krishna and Jesus. Like, it doesn't matter. Whatever you want to talk about, that's cool. Let's have a heart conversation. That's what matters most to me.
Where do we connect? And it's not always going to be on that spiritual level, right?
That's it. Exactly. Right. So, yeah, so I mean, that's the first book. And then Everything Mind was published in 2015 by Sounds True. And that's kind of a continuation of Indie Spiritualist. Obviously, not as much autobiographical, but I kind of use myself as my own experiment in my books. And I am always happy to throw myself under the bus and say, look, here's the ways I'm still failing miserably. And
I do a little bit of that too. I'm not scared.
Yeah, no, exactly. It's like,
that goes with the whole no BS approach, right? I mean, I always say on this show, it's like, hey guys, I'm doing this first and foremost for myself. We teach best what we most need to learn. I'm like here just laying it all out on the line. And if it helps you, I'm going to tell you where I've got issues. I'm going to do all those things. And I feel like people really resonate with vulnerability. Yeah. And I feel like vulnerability and being genuine, that is like the new, it's becoming like so much more common, and it's so refreshing in a world that's been so not that.
Absolutely, that and the authenticity as well that comes along with that, because a lot of people out there aren't willing to just lay it on the line like that. They have their careers are so important, and they want to sell books and this and that, and okay, I get it, but that's not me, and that's not who I've ever been. It's not who I will ever be. I am who I am, man. The good, the bad, the ugly. And let me lay it out there. And like you said, that is what resonates with people. At least, the people that I'm hoping to connect with. So
exactly.
Yeah. So that's the second book. It was more practices from different wisdom traditions. Again, covering that one goes a little more in depth into the spiritual explorations, and but while still talking about like The Simpsons or David Lynch movies and skateboarding and whatever. Like, to me, it's all part of the path. It's all relevant. So I don't compartmentalize my spirituality to just formally sitting on a meditation mat. If that was it, man, that would be a miserable spiritual life for me.
It sure would. I agree.
Oh yeah. I mean, I write a story about seeing a Motorhead concert and Slayer together and having literally like a very incredible spiritual experience there, because I was open to having a spiritual experience there, So, I kind of laugh that I'm able to write books and talk about Slayer, and then the next chapter talk about Buddha. So. It works for me.
I can't help but anytime I hear Slayer, I was just telling my son this, laughing, thinking back to being like 16 years old, and my best friend at the time, Paul. This guy is just like such a character, and at the time, I was living. My family was a very like conservative Christian household, and he was always at my house, and my mom was giving him the you listen to that devil music, kind of talk all the time. So one Christmas, he decided, as my Christmas present, and all the guilt piled on him, he's going to deliver all his Slayer tapes or CDs at the time. It might even been tapes. Deliver them all to my mom as like here, I'm giving them as a Christmas present. Take away the devil music. And literally like 3 days later, he comes driving up in his little Civic, and I hear Slayer bumping.
There it is.
He's like, I couldn't bear it. He went out and bought them all over again. So anytime I hear Slayer, I think of my friend Paul and his attempt at weeding out that part of himself, and it didn't go very well.
Funny. Yeah, I mean, like I have friends that love Slayer. I have friends that don't like Slayer. And again, I don't care what you like. Like, as long as you're not harming someone else, like whatever you like. I do have to laugh at sometimes though when, because I've certainly caught guff from people that are like, you can't like that and be spiritual, or I'm heavily covered in tattoos, and what does this guy know about spirituality? He has so many tattoos. Any real spiritual person would never do that. And it's like, okay, like that's your business. That shows how much work you still have left, but when these people are coming down on appearance or musical taste, not always, but often these are the same people that are going to go home and watch R-rated movies, that have a lot of what this music is talking about, portrayed on the screen. So it's a pretty big contradiction. And again, not everyone, some people just take all of that out of their life because that's what they feel compelled to do, and that's awesome. Other people do it because it's what they think they do, and to me that's not awesome, because then they're just not being honest to themselves or with themselves. But again, it just comes back to honoring your truth and what it is, as true in your heart, and you are the only one that will ever know that. Only you can know that.
Right. Yeah. I go to, and I don't know if you've been to any, what a lot of people refer to as transformational festivals, but very more and more popular out here on the West Coast, and sort of like, Burning Man-esque events. And I see a lot of people now with tattoos, and, I think we're slowly but surely making it through sort of and everyone, of course, is on their own unique path, but I think we're seeing more and more less judgment and more acceptance, regardless of external appearance. And I always say, the more you judge, the level of your judgment is equatable to your level of ignorance, essentially. And so I love to see more and more people. I love to see people that don't quote unquote look the part, because every time you start putting things in a box, it's like it just gets, I don't know. I'm just all about getting out of that box.
I agree, man. Story of my life. I'll tell you, that just made me think of so Saturday, 2 days ago, I was just out at Chapel of Sacred Mirrors. I was doing an event with Alex Gray, going back to the whole psychedelic thing. Yeah. Yeah, I was doing an event with him and Allison, and I was so inspired, to see that at least 80% out of like the 200 plus people there had to have been under the age of 30.
It's like all these super young kids, like it's the thing, man. I mean, everyone is just it's become like popular to be into spirituality. I mean,
I'm psyched on that. Like, it was great. They some of them had tattoos, some didn't. It didn't matter, but a lot of them were just their own eccentric selves. And even with Ram Daas, my podcast is hosted over on his network, and I've done some events with the Love Serve Remember Foundation, and there's a lot of young people there too. So there's these teachers, these luminaries that are over 60, 70, 80 years old, but they're attracting the younger crowds, and that's so inspiring. I think that speaks volumes, to the timelessness of the messages that are being shared, because they truly are timeless. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, speaking of messages, what is the next message? What you've got a book you're working on, you said.
Yeah, that one, it actually explores the main focus is relapse, but not just relapse to drugs and alcohol, relapse, in life. Like, why do we return to the self-defeating behaviors that we do? So again, it's not just about if you're returning to pills or a bottle, but, I'm talking about people that have 10, 20, 30 years meditation practice. Yet, when things start to fall apart, they'll go on TV binges, or start eating or engage in unhealthy sexual activities. So it's really exploring that, again, using, myself kind of as an experiment. But with this one, I spoke with a lot of teachers like Gabor Mate, Ram Daas, and Sharon Salzberg, Tara Brach, and plenty of others, and exploring, that question and many others, and as well as how do we keep ourselves from going back down that road, and getting practices from them, and looking at it through all these different lenses. So one conversation might be a Buddhist lens, another a Hindu, another an atheist lens, another a neuroscientist lens, and just really I wanted to write a book. That's what I do with all my books, is write books that I wish I had read, when I was getting into recovery or the spiritual path. So I wanted to write this as kind of a complementary book. It's not meant to replace any forms of recovery or healing modalities out there, but it's really a complementary one that explores numerous ways in which we can heal, with the purpose being that hopefully one or two, maybe more, will resonate, with readers, and will help them to really engage in the experience, like I was saying earlier, that I went through, of learning how to truly soften and find that compassion for myself enough so that I could go within and start working with all the ugliness that's in there. And there's still ugliness in there. I'm not a fully healed human being. I am flawed in countless ways, and I still fail in countless ways. But I've learned to, again, be gentle with myself during those times of failure, to come back, to pick myself back up, to Pema Chodron had a book that just came out, and I don't remember the title exactly, but something like Fail, Fail Again, Fail Better. And I love that title, because that's what I really have been trying to learn to do in my life. Because, we all fail. We're human beings. And some people don't like the word fail, but we all fall down. We all fall short. However you want to word it, it just happens in life. But the question then becomes, okay, what do I do from that point? We have a
Right.
decision to make. What road am I going to take? Am I going to keep going down this road that's not serving me, or am I going to step onto this new path, this new road, where health and healing and true living happens? So that's what the book's about, and I'm really excited. Still working on it, so it's not going to be out for a while. But that will be the next book.
Yeah, it makes me think of. I just was checking out. Actually, a good friend of mine who I did my first ayahuasca journeys with is in the new HBO series Westworld. And so I wanted to check it out last night and see him. And, he credits ayahuasca to, he was a cocaine addict, suicidal. And he credits ayahuasca as turning it all around. Then he got this role and, significant role with all these, incredible actors that, are part of this, HBO's next big show. So,
phenomenal show.
Yeah. And just
Amazing.
came out, and I was checking it out last night, and what you're just saying made me think of a comment in the show talking about how evolution has gotten to where it is based off of one idea, one concept, and that is mistakes. Learning from mistakes. And all of our evolution has been birthed from that. And when you understand that, that is part of the journey, learning from your mistakes. It's a feedback loop. Your reality is a feedback loop. You're always getting what you need and being shown, here's how you adjust. Oh, this is reflecting a piece of yourself back that you need to really pay attention to. And how do you approach it differently to get different reflections? And so I think that's an important piece for people, because it's so easy to beat up on yourself, especially if you're, addict and depressed and all those things, like you mentioned, those people can be so hard on themselves. And so if you can understand, this is just part of your journey, part of the story, the sweet's never quite as sweet without the sour, right?
Absolutely. And it's so well said. And that is so we're so hard on ourselves. We have these mental tapes or these loops just playing in our head over and over. We're we're just berating ourselves. And this is for addicts and non-addicts alike. That's the majority of people in the world, just have all of this negative self-talk going on. And so these thoughts are creating these emotions, and the emotions are just propelling more of the negative thoughts. And we're feeding into them and we're believing them. And, so then we're experiencing life through this place of just kind of negativity and heaviness, when all they are thoughts. They're literally, they're thoughts. They come, stay a little while, and then they go. And these little things, that are happening in the brain, we take them on to be like the be all end all of reality, when they're just thoughts. So what's behind the thought? What is underneath the thought? Nothing. It is just what it is. Like Ram Daas would say, be here now. And when you are here now, this is what is. It simply is. And that's all there is. And anyway, so that's why the practice of meditation and other, mantra practices and spiritual practices have been so important in my life to bring me back to the moment. So it's not only about learning to weather the storm better, because that's a part of it. You can be here now all day long, and the storm is still going to come at some point. It's life. But, so learning to weather the storm, but also finding more present moments and literally just being here in that experience of interconnectivity with life, with everything.
Yeah. Yeah. Very, very well said. And it's, I always like to think of it like, the past doesn't exist. You can't show it to me. The future never arrives like you imagine it. All you have, the present, is literally your present. It's a gift. And anything that you're dealing with, you can always deal with in this moment. You've always found a way through it. You got to this point, right? And you'll continue to exist. You'll continue to find a way. There are no problems, only solutions. And when you sort of take all these sort of perspectives and make them the foundation, sort of the base operating system in your brain, this changes so much for you. And it's so empowering, when you understand that all the hiccups, are part of the whole journey. Fall down 7 times, get up 8, I think is the Chinese proverb, right?
That's right.
So that's what we're doing here, right? And so people just need to relax with themselves, I think. And we're always, the hardest on ourselves, of course.
Oh, of course. Yeah. It's tough, man. It's tough.
Yeah, it definitely can be. And, of course it can get a lot easier, as you sort of get better. And that's of course what we're doing, right? You've got a podcast, you're talking about all this type of information. It's like, how do we really just burn it into our psyche, into our hearts, into our minds, so that it becomes easier to operate in a way that doesn't create so much discord. Right. And I'm curious, with your podcast now, you have some pretty amazing people. It's the Indie Spiritualist is the name, correct?
Yeah. And it's on the Be Here Now network, which is hosted by the Love Server Member Foundation, part of Ram Daas's network. Yeah, it's a really cool. I mean, I was beside myself when they asked me to join, because it's a network that hosts podcasts from people like Ram Daas and Krishna Das and Sharon Salzberg, Jack Kornfield. These are like my teachers. So they asked me to host one with them, and I think that was a little over a year ago, maybe, give or take. And I was like, yep, of course.
Yes. Where do I sign up? That's super exciting. So you've been at it a little over a year, and is there any particular, and I really don't like it when people ask me this question, but I'm going to ask it to you anyway. Is there a favorite guest or most memorable episode that you can think of, if people were to go check it out, that you would recommend?
That's a good question. Man.
Sort of good. I don't know. It makes me mad when people ask me. I'm like, no, I like them all. But I normally have an answer.
No, and I do too. There are definitely, I feel, highlights, from all of them. I only have guests on that I really want to talk to. Right. I can say one that I just did. Actually, the podcast didn't air. When I do my podcast, I also do the video. I record both audio and video, and I do a little web series. So on my own, or actually through a nonprofit here in Connecticut called Toivo, really wonderful collective that I'm honored to be a part of. I take the video part and I do this little web series. So same interview, but I offer, the video there and then the audio with the Be Here Now network. And I mention that only because what's coming to mind is an interview I just did that has aired on video, but not yet on audio on the podcast. And that was with Damien Eccles. And Damien was one of the West Memphis Three that became very famous in the 90s. Speaking of HBO, they did a 3-part documentary series called, what was it? Lost in Paradise. And, Paradise Lost. And it was about Damien Eccles and these 2 other boys that were convicted of murdering three children, but they were wrongfully convicted. And anyways, it was just an exceptionally fascinating case, and one in which drew the attention of people like Johnny Depp and Eddie Vedder from Pearl Jam, the director Peter Jackson, all sorts of people that would come out publicly and do conferences and do benefits to raise money for them. I think Patti Smith at some point was doing something. And so anyways, they were finally exonerated almost 5 years ago to the day. And so that was a really fascinating conversation. It will be airing on the Be Here Now network very shortly. But the video version is up right now over on YouTube. But yeah, talking with Damien about his experience, that was really great. But again,
what a wild experience.
Seriously, I mean, he was there for almost 20 years on death row, and I think 10 or 12 of them was spent in solitary confinement.
Oh my gosh.
Oh yeah, just a horrific experience. So that was a really neat conversation to have. But again, like I said, there's highlights, I think, in all of them. I really appreciate all those conversations. And the cool thing too is that I've had people like Ram Daas on there, and it's a lot of, just the spiritual teachers that have meant things or, been meaningful in my life. But then I also have like musicians from bands that I like, or Jessica Pimentel, who's a wonderful actress on the show Orange is the New Black. She's a friend and a real sweetheart. And she came on, and she's Buddhist and also sings for a hardcore band. So we got to talk about Buddhism and hardcore and Orange is the New Black. And, so I like to, keep it interesting and keep it different.
Right. Yeah, that's definitely an eclectic mix of topics. So that's which is good. It's a diverse mind, right? And
exactly.
Talking. Yeah, it's always, especially when you're creating a lot of content, it's like, how do you keep it fresh? How do you and thank goodness with a lot of the spiritual stuff, it really works to my advantage because first, that's sort of the primary thing I always go to, but luckily it's something that we need to hear over and over because we're also slow to adapt. It's like, it's one thing to understand it logically, and it's another thing to really apply it to your life, right? And so for me, I think it's a daily conscious effort to sort of just like how to burn this stuff into my brain and mind and heart and soul,
That's it. Apply it and embody it. I think that's the main thing.
I like that. I like that.
Yeah, because of course, like in the beginning, well, honestly, some of it didn't make sense to me because there can be some really heady concepts depending on the traditions. If you're looking at Tibet Buddhism, for example, like, wow, there's a lot going on there. But you spend time with it and it starts to make sense. But really, it's not just about understanding it. That's great, but you can be scholarly all day long. If you're not living it, if you're not embodying it, if it's not a heart practice or a heart living, then really it's just not useless knowledge, but it's just knowledge. That's all it is. Yeah. So you need to, again, practice it. And same here, just like you said, being able to talk to people about it, as frequently as I do, these guests and from different traditions. I love that because that helps me just see what I might be studying at any given time, see it through a different lens. And I've found it helps me to go deeper into it in many cases. I have friends that are Christian who will say that they've taken on Buddhist meditation practices and that has brought them closer to Christ, than they've ever felt. Or someone might be Buddhist, and I've actually heard this too, where they've, started praying to Jesus, while still honoring Buddhist tradition. And that's brought them much more into a heart-centered version of their practice. So, I think there's a lot of beauty in learning and in talking and celebrating one another's beliefs and experiences.
Absolutely. Now, you mentioned Toivo, and you're a spiritual director there. What does that entail?
Yeah, so essentially, like I said, I do this web series show with them. I also create different curriculums there with them. I'm not the only one doing it. But Toivo, what they are, it's a nonprofit located in Hartford, Connecticut. And essentially, they're offering all of these different mind, body, spirit modalities to people that otherwise wouldn't normally have access to them. And again, it's often tailored to people that fall under the mental health umbrella. It's not restricted to that at all. But I think a part of the passion is that, people go through treatment, and unfortunately, a lot of the treatment centers don't offer meditation. They don't offer yoga. They don't offer qigong or sound healing. And these are all things that you can come and find at Toivo. And it's always free. No one's turned away. Yes, they take donations, of course. But, we're there and we're offering these things to the community. It's a very community-centered organization. But we'll go and we'll speak at different conferences, or they were just out in California doing an event out there. I was in Canada at the time. So that's Toivo, and that's part of what I do there is, help create the curriculums, and I'll also lead workshops, day-longs, or, teach classes, things of that nature. And the website for anyone who's interested, it might be in Connecticut if you're listening, is toivocenter.org. Toivo's spelled Toivo. I couldn't be more passionate about the work I do there. I love that I get to write books, and then on my own, I get to go speak at conferences and festivals. But it was through that I met these people at Toivo, and have begun working much more closely with them, and actually pulled back a bit on the conferences and the festivals, so I could focus my energies there, because I don't know, that's just kind of where my heart led me, and I'm very excited to do that.
Sounds like an ideal fit for you.
Yeah, it couldn't be more ideal. So it's really perfect.
Yeah. Very cool. Well, one of the questions, Chris, I always like to ask, I'm fascinated with stories of synchronicity, serendipity, positive paranormal events. And so curious, do you have a good story to share with the listeners?
Yeah, what comes to mind, actually, I have numerous ones that are coming to mind, all based on...
What? We've got all day.
I'll share one, but it's funny because I'm laughing because the ones that are coming to mind all directly involve an Indian guru. His name is Maharaji, and Maharaji is Ram Daas's guru. That's
right.
When Ram Daas met him, he was still Richard Alpert, and he had just left Harvard as a teacher or a professor there. He goes to India and meets Maharaji, and his life changes for forever from there.
Right.
So anyways, Maharaji has become very important in my life. He's no longer in the physical realm, but I do believe he is absolutely still with us here. And anyways, so I don't know which Maharaji story do I tell? I'll tell the first one, I guess, which was I think in 2013. I was doing my first interview with Ram Daas on Skype, and this was for a different program at the time. And so we were talking about this new book he had coming out, Polishing the Mirror, a really wonderful book. Before we did that, he was waiting for something. So we were just chatting a little bit, and he asked me what I had going on, and I'd mentioned, I have my first book coming out, and he was asking me about it, and I told him, and he was like, oh, that's great. And so then we start the interview, and we do the interview, and about an hour goes by. And at the end of it, or after the interview, we were just talking a little bit more, just chatting. And he says to me, well, I should say, the whole time we're doing the interview, not the whole time, but a lot of it, in the back of my mind, it's like, oh, you should ask him if he'd write an endorsement. Like, it'd be so cool if he wrote an endorsement, like, because he's one of my heroes. And
sure.
I also know, he's older, he's very busy, and I didn't want to bother him with that. But so after the interview, as we're talking, he says to me, he goes, so you have this new book coming out? And I said, yeah. And he goes, well, I want to offer it my Ashibad, which means blessing. And he said, that's what Maharaji offered him when Be Here Now came out. Yeah. And then he said, and I want to offer you, or I want to write an endorsement for it. So send me the manuscript, and I'll write an endorsement. And then he says, and that came through from the big guy, and pointed his finger up in the air, referencing Maharaji.
Wow.
And I'll tell you, Brandon, it was just one of those moments where it was like, did that really happen?
That's so like cool.
Such a surreal, like, what I would expect someone who maybe saw a UFO, for example, like, quickly passing. They're like, oh, did I really just see that?
Yeah.
That's kind of like what I liken to, like, what did that really just happen? Luckily, I had it recorded, so I went back and played it, and I'm like, okay, it really did happen.
Yeah, right.
But really, it was it was so surreal to me that, like, I was thinking that, like, it just, it'd be so great to have that endorsement, and then deciding against asking him. And then, him offering and saying it comes through, from Maharaji.
From Maharaji,
That was kind of his wink to me that, like, synchronicity. That's, and also Maharaji knows what's going on, and I'm just letting you know. So, anyways, that was a bit of a synchronicity story. And
that's a very cool one. That's a very, very cool story. It's like to sort of get that sort of a confirmation.
Yes.
From not only this person in the physical that you are, is such a mentor and so forth, but then it's like one step beyond that. His mentor is now literally coming through the veil to help push along what you're scared to ask for. It's like you might be on the right path here, and of course it says all kinds of things about your own connection to these being, and of course now you're on their network, and it's like I'm always fascinated by sort of pondering the connections between souls, right? Like, what is the history there? There's some level, in my opinion, I would believe there's some level of deep history there, and as a result, you have soul contracts to come into each other's lives and play certain roles, and it's all one, right? But there happens to be branches, with leaves right next to each other, and you are right there mixing it up with some very fascinating individuals. So I can only imagine the things that we're going to continue to come from you are going to be equally fascinating.
Thanks for saying that. And I'll just say one thing to that is, there are times where I still have a lot of self-doubt come up. There's this deeply ingrained stuff from years ago that comes along with the addiction and what I went through. And so there's still self-worth stuff and self-doubt. And it's like, man, you're not deserving of that. And I was talking to a friend about this about a month ago. And she said, it's not just about you. That's ego. She said, don't forget that you are co-creating, and she was so right. And that has helped me. And I'm just sharing that in case it might be of benefit to anyone who's listening.
Sure.
They also might have the self-doubt or self-worth. That helped
pretty
me
much everyone.
Right. Sure. So there you go.
At some level, right?
Right. But it's not just about us. We really are here co-creating. And when I, keep that in mind, it helps to quiet that self-doubt. So it's not about me. It's about co-creating. It's about much more than just this physical body, this physical vessel, that the mind body that is Chris Grosso. This is here. It'll stay a little while and then it'll be done, just like the story of all of us. But what is always here is that which is deeper. Some call it God, some call it source, spirit, the universe, cosmic consciousness. It has many, many names. But remembering that this body mind that is Chris Grosso is also integrally connected with this consciousness, this source, again, whatever you care to call it.
Right.
And that for me has been really helpful in quieting that self-doubt and the self-worth stuff, and helping me to lay myself aside, lay my thoughts aside, and just be of service.
Right.
Just show up. And part of the prayer I say every morning is, I would like to be a vessel, or I want to be the faucet through which your water of wisdom and compassion and joy and service flows through. May I embody these qualities and share them freely with all beings. And that's what
beautiful.
That's what I hope to do each and every day, the best I can on that day.
Well, you're doing it, my friend. And, it's probably a good thing you're not too connected to just your physical avatar. Otherwise, you might be offended by the fact that I said Chris Grosso and not Grosso at the intro.
I am not offended.
Luckily, you're not too...
No, Brandon. You and 99.9% of other people, it's Grosso, Gray. I've heard everything. So anyways,
right.
But thank you. Let's spot it. But no, I don't care about it.
That's too good. It's all I could think about when you first started, you first said it, and then what you were talking about. I'm like, oh, okay, well, good thing he's not too attached, and he realizes he's a vessel. That's funny. Well, what's the best way for people to connect with you, Chris? Obviously, your podcast, The Indie Spiritualist, your books are available, I know, on Amazon. You have a website as well, indiespiritualist.com, correct?
Yeah, and I think that's the best place. You can pretty much find all my social media links there. You could find, the podcast and web series through there. So, yeah, theindiespiritualist.com. Even links to buy the books are there. Or, like you said, Amazon, Barnes & Noble. They're available everywhere books are sold if you're interested.
Well, I can't see how people wouldn't be interested. You're a very interesting individual, Chris, and this has been such a pleasure. I do have... one last question I'd like to leave you with. I always leave my guests with 60 seconds or less. What's the meaning of life according to Chris Grosso?
In 60 seconds or less. Man, I would love to be really esoteric right now and just have 60 seconds of silence and have that be my answer. But I know podcast.
That would be a first.
Yeah, I mean, but I also, being a podcaster, know that probably wouldn't go over well with the audience. So let me
You got the point across, though. So that's his first answer, silence. I like that answer. That's very, very good. Okay, now let's do the podcast version.
Yeah, podcast version, man. I like the silence though, because in that silence can be expressed the inexpressible, and I do believe that. When you are going back to be here now, there doesn't even need to be a meaning for life at that point, because there's no you left to find meaning. You are just completely connected with everything. And it's not that you are connected, it's just one movement. It's life unfolding. So the physical body that is Chris Grosso is the same exact unfolding of life as the tree outside of my window, as the leaves falling, as the water that moves. It's all part of one movement, and that's found in this present moment, in this silence. And to me, I guess there's no greater meaning than life to find and experience that truth. So there you go. Hopefully that was less than 60 seconds.
Very, very well said. Yeah, that it doesn't matter if it's 62 seconds. We'll take it.
Cool.
You had some silence in there we can edit out. So
there you go.
Chris, thank you, my friend. This has been such a pleasure connecting with you. And I look forward to following your continued good work. It is definitely good work that you're doing, and I appreciate the opportunity to connect with you here, and I know the listeners have enjoyed it as well.
Thanks, Brandon. The feeling is totally mutual. I appreciate you having me on as a guest. Thank you.
Absolutely. Well, everyone, that concludes this week's interview episode. If you have enjoyed this positive download from our hearts and minds to yours, please take a minute, give us a rating or review on iTunes. Since iTunes is the holy grail of all things podcasting, your good reviews help us to reach more listeners. Also, we would be extremely appreciative if you would tell your friends and family about the show. Our sincere intent with the Positive Head podcast is to spread positivity to the world because we're selfish, quite honestly. I say that jokingly, but really only halfway joking. I'm referring to the good kind of selfish based on the knowing that we all get what we give in this life, because when we give, we're actually always giving to extensions of self, since we're all really one in the same consciousness, just in different bodies. So if you want to be a good selfish along with us by helping to spread the positivity, by all means, please proceed to shout about the Positive Head podcast from your rooftop. Otherwise, as you continue on your fabulous journey in this 3D reality, be sure to remember this. As long as you ain't dead, you're already positive ahead. Journey well, everyone, and thank you for being.